one of the biggest through lines in my whole ancestral line is this reality that the men in the line were emotionally absent or abusive or violent or addicted. So there was this very absent vision of what a safe, healthy masculine could look like.
When you go beyond the surface and into the depths of who you truly are, you will rise. Kayla, welcome to the podcast. I'm so excited, honored to be in conversation with you today. And the place that I want to kick off first and foremost is I would just love for you to just share what your current mission is and your purpose and what's unfolding for you.
Thank you so much for having me, first of all. And that is the big question of the era, I find. So I started in the health coaching field because I wanted to help women break free from their challenges with food and body image. But through my own personal work and inner work, spiritual work, learning deeper modalities, I realized it's never about the food and the body image. Those are such red herrings. So now my deeper purpose is to help women reclaim self-authorship, power, their fullest self-expression. And one of the ways you do often do that is helping them with their food and body image stuff, but not in the form of macros or tracking.
Yeah.
So that's me right now.
I love that. We have to acknowledge sometimes a lot of it is just almost like a byproduct of other things that are happening in our world. I would love to start because something that you shared with me is in your marriage was ancestral wounds and things that were coming into your marriage. And I'm curious if you can speak to that and that journey and what was that? What were the things that started to come up for you? And also how you navigated that as well.
So yes, when I got married, I had some very unexpected challenges come up. So I had been in a period of consistency, of follow through, feeling really good with my habits, my nutrition, self-care. And then I got engaged and then moved in with my now husband. And I was so excited. I have the best husband. I'm not even exaggerating. And still, all of a sudden, my binge eating came back full force. My anxiety returned with a vengeance. I had no energy. It felt like everything just took this huge nosedive. And at the time, I was trying to start a business, and I thought, okay, I'm just really stressed about this business thing. I got to figure that out. However, at the same time, I was working with a therapist who did a lot of ancestral work, who did a lot of navigating what's actually ours and what's not ours. So in working with her, I was sharing some of the ways that I felt trapped by my current circumstances. And she asked me how old that energy of being trapped felt. And it turned out it felt older than me. So then she asked, does it feel like your mother's? And it felt older in my body. So I feel it went back as far as at least my grandmother, if not further.
Right.
And it was over the course of continuing to do this deeper work and learning about how we hold on to things ancestrally in our bodies, I realized most, if not all, of the marriages on both my mother's and my father's side involved abuse, substance addiction from the male partner, financial domination, coerced marriages, religious baggage. Like there was so much. So even though I had the best husband and was choosing him from a place of, yes, I want this. Yes, this is safe. Because we carry those old wounds in our body that are older than us, parts of my body were like, no, this is not safe. And then that's when all of those habits started to happen, not as a self-sabotage, but as a way of, we need to do something to self-soothe because this does not feel okay on some level.
Yeah. Oh my gosh, I relate so deeply. It's so funny when you're saying you have the best husband. I'm like, we might need to argue for that title, but you know what I mean? Because I feel the same too about my husband. And yeah, it's interest. I think our relationships, especially those very intimate, close relationships, are the ones that bring up so much in the sense they are true mirrors. That's, not a new thing to hear, but they truly are. And they can be a mirror for love and that joy. And they can be that mirror that brings up our deepest fears and our deepest triggers. And I'm curious, as this like realization started to come up in your relationship and starting to understand where it was coming from and how it was coming from, ancestral and just like, mom and their experience in other marriages, how did that start to impact your marriage? And then also, what did that dynamic look like, I guess, even in perhaps, what's the word that I'm looking for? Maybe just healing that part in your relationship, in your marriage. How did you navigate that together?
That's a very good question. So, how it initially affected the marriage. When someone is self-abandoning with food, numbing out with food, they're not going to be their happiest, shiniest self. So that by default is going to create some challenges. And my husband is so patient. So it wasn't like a huge thing, but obviously when I started to work with this, things improved considerably. And then in terms of starting to heal this dynamic, I feel it's twofold. One part needs to happen in relationship and the other actually needs to happen through the body, because that's where we're carrying all the stuff. It's not in our mind. We can't mindset and problem solve our way out of ancestral wounding. We have to actually process it through the body. So I was very fortunate to discover a modality called dance alchemy. And that's a very beautiful practice that takes you through the 4 elements. And it has been probably the most healing thing I've ever learned and been certified in, because you're not trying to mindset your way out of something. You're not spinning your way into a headache, trying to figure something out that your brain just isn't capable of figuring out.
Yeah.
But when you're able to dance and let your body move in the way it feels called to move, that is when you can start to release some of that ancestral stuff.
Wow.
And you don't go into it with the intention of like, I'm gonna release this block today. You just let your body move. A lot of the times you'll start crying for no reason, but then you'll feel better. And like, I've committed to this practice pretty much every morning since I started doing it, and it has released so many layers. And I don't have to figure out exactly how it's happening. It's kind of like electricity. You don't have to know exactly how it works to know it's working.
I love that so much. I don't think I've ever heard of dance alchemy. In this moment, what I am thinking about is just it's finding the pieces to the puzzle. I think sometimes we focus so much on the mind and the soul, and we kind of forget about the body. And this is what I mean about finding the pieces to the puzzle that are going to support us in all those aspects to release from our body. Because I think one thing that I've learned so much this year is how, especially as women, we carry so much in our womb space. And there's so much in our body that we carry. And sometimes we don't even know that it's living there until something triggers it, or we give ourselves this experience, probably something like dance alchemy. But I think what I love so much is just we kind of have to find those pieces to the puzzle where what's supporting me on a mind, body, soul level to help me heal, to help me release whatever it is that is holding us back, keeping us trapped, like all the different, whatever that story is for us, right? Can you tell me more too about how your husband supporting you?
It was a very slow, steady unwinding of my nervous system. And it took time. And I realized I came into this relationship with a lot of limiting beliefs about what a marriage needed to look like. And it's interesting. I've talked to another married woman about this, and I was sharing some of the work I was doing around marriage, sharing finances, still being a fully self-expressed woman. And she talked about this idea of like a marriage contract. And what she said is that you're learning how to have the marriage without the contract, as in the contraction, right? Like it's more of a marriage expansion.
Wow.
And the best thing is having someone that I can fully communicate with, and having someone who can have those real open conversations with. And he actually listens and he navigates the situations differently. when that communication is present, and then I'll do the same for him. And that's been so helpful because in the marriage I witnessed growing up, my mom and dad, my mom was in a marriage she did not want to be in. So she had a lot of anger, a
Yeah.
lot of rage. So it felt like she would just like blow up at my dad over everything. And I saw that and I was like, I'm never going to get mad, which isn't ideal either. So it's been a very steady learning of there's a happy medium between like blowing up at your partner from a place of volatility and then stuffing everything down and not communicating. And
Yes.
it's been really good to find that balance.
Yeah. And also to not make any of the emotions that come up also wrong either, because we're meant to experience all the aspects of the emotions, right? To say like, I'm never going to get angry. That's impossible. It's not something that's even realistic. We're also allowed to get angry. And I think what I always come back to, and correct me if I'm wrong, but at least for me, because I've never, one of my biggest things was never witnessing a healthy marriage or just two people who stay together. From my mom, her sister, there was just divorce everywhere. And now, thankfully, I have my cousins who are in long term marriages, and I love it so much. And it almost feels like we're navigating this in a way where it's like doing this, we're literally first, right? And we're choosing. And I think that's such a big part, is choosing to do things differently. And that means, and that's where I feel like I resonate so much with just like breaking the cycle, is it's not to come from this place of like, I'm a cycle breaker. I don't love that. I just feel like it's this deep choice, and every single day of making that choice to, you know, not run for the hills when it comes to having the hard conversations in our relationship, and also not going up in defense if, for example, my husband comes to me and says, I need you to do this, or I need this from you. And it's like, not to go into defense, but into say, you're right, absolutely. It can be really challenging and uncomfortable to be in those positions and in those situations. But I think the biggest thing that I've concluded too in my developing of my relationship and my marriage is safety is such a big part of it. We have to feel safe in our partnership in order to be able to have this open communication, to for us to come to each other when it's really hard, to have those hard conversations. I think we underestimate the level of safety in our nervous system that we have to develop. And it's like you said, I really love what you said about it being something that happens in relationship, and also it happens individually. We all have to take accountability and responsibility for our own selves. And then, there's that whole piece about coming into relationship.
100%. And that's another part of the work I've deepened into is that inner work first, especially the work
Yeah.
with my own inner masculine.
Mm.
So creating that sense of safety from within. And when you do that inner work yourself, you can actually start to get more data about what does safety look like in external relationships? How can I best teach people to love and support me through communication, through my examples? And that has been such a key part of it, because I think one thing that I used to do as a young 20 something year old was I would outsource all of my worth, my safety, my desirability onto like my male partner. And that's a lot of pressure for anybody to take on. And then I wondered why I repelled all of these, young 20 something year old boys. So when you do that work to resource from within first, it was only then that I called in my now husband.
Yep. As you can see, I'm just like, I think for me, it was maybe like a little different in the sense of, I would become very attached. And it wasn't even just like in my own relationships. It was actually even in the relation. I have two older sisters, so I was the youngest, and my parents separated when I was very young. I've always say like, it's something that I'm grateful in a way that I don't remember. I don't remember it happening. It feels like my entire life, it feels like my normal was me, my mom, and my sisters, and my dad was kind of on the outside. But I would even cling to my sisters and their partners. So when they were going through a breakup, I was going through a breakup, and I was like, you got to break up with me too. Like it was very hard because I, just deeply desired that like figure, that male relationship. And then there's that whole piece of like feeling abandoned. And to be honest, that's all like for me new information because again, it's interesting. You can go down this journey of growth and healing and then the layers continue to peel back, right? Like I feel like even in the last like
Totally.
year, so much has even unfolded even more to even understand how deeply I have this abandonment wound, right? It's like new, constantly new information. I love actually using that better sometimes than healing because I don't want us to always feel like we're broken or we're always having to heal, but just finding the new information, I've always said when we have that awareness brings us so much power because then we can start to witness it and start to see where maybe our inner child or a younger version of ourselves is coming out and they're the ones that are kind of being impacted in some way, or maybe it's bringing up a really like core wound that we haven't allowed our inner child to even sit with and acknowledge. But I'm curious from your stance, what do you think most people misunderstand about these inherited wounds and patterns, especially women?
I think one of the things that they might misunderstand or worry about is that whole they need to figure it out, they need to fix it. I think that's a big common misconception. And I agree, sometimes the word healing implies a level of brokenness, and nobody's broken. So I prefer integration and like a returning to wholeness.
Mm-hmm.
And so again, ancestral healing doesn't, or integration doesn't have to look like fixing or figuring it out or problem solving. It can really happen in those relationships through our aligned actions, through creating intimacy and safety. And then also that somatic work is so powerful. And again, you don't have to go into it being like, this is exactly now it needs to unfold. Your body knows what to do without your brain figuring it out. That was the one thing. And then the other is that it doesn't mean that you're behind or you're lost. This can actually turn into one of your biggest gifts if you choose to tell that story. I think those are the two things I would really highlight.
I love that. I love both very much. I think I love the second piece. And I'm curious too how you've been able to turn that into a gift.
I actually had a very interesting experience with a medium where I connected to my great great grandmother. And in this session, she came through and she was telling me that the work I was doing was very important and very needed. And it was after that session and through continuing to do my own work and find my true north, I realized one of the biggest through lines in my whole ancestral line is this reality that the men in the line were emotionally absent or abusive or violent or addicted. So there was this very absent vision of what a safe, healthy masculine could look like. And I also think because that was so absent in all of the females in my line, is that they had a hard time cultivating it within themselves. They had a hard time cultivating that structure, that independence, that safety. And that's been the work I've really dropped into is how can women, while being women and, feminine energy, also cultivate this very strong masculine that actually creates more safety and containment for all of that like magic and expression that's meant to come through. And I don't think I would have gotten into this work if I didn't have all of that challenging stuff around men in my family line.
Yeah. Can you share a little bit of what that's looked like, that piece around like the healthy masculine?
All right, get ready because this is a little unconventional
Okay.
and a little unhinged, but it works better than anything else I've ever done. So, are you familiar with the term animus at all?
No.
So, this is a Jungian term, and basically, every woman has a masculine part of their personality, and that's called the animus. And that tends to start developing as they get into adulthood. And the animus is this very like purpose driven, directive, logical, structured part of them that knows that they have powerful gifts to bring into the world. And it's sort of the containment or the riverbanks helping them get there. But for many women, this is underdeveloped, or it turns into this really mean tyrant bully sort of figure.
Mm-hmm.
And I was the latter for sure.
Yeah.
It was a pretty mean part. But what's also important to know about this part is that There are no bad parts in our psyche.
Mm.
All of them are deeply in love with us and want what's best for us. They just are sometimes misguided or wounded in their own ways. So I have actually created something that I called Divine Daddy Storytelling. Some people hate the name, but what it is it's working with that divine masculine energy to reparent the inner children, to create that safe masculine presence, and also create a little bit of play and fun and turn on in an inner work journey. Because so much of, the spiritual healing is very, you got to sit and cry with your inner child. You got to meditate in like a very stoic way. And yes, all those things are really good. But what's missing is that play aspect, that fun aspect. So that instead of always feeling like, oh, I got to go work on myself, what if you just get to go play and have fun? And paradoxically, that has created more transformation than any amount of like serious inner work ever has.
I love that because I've said so much that healing and doing that inner work doesn't always have to look like a dark night of the soul. It can be gentle. It can be playful. It could be through laughter that you heal. And that sometimes I feel like it's hard to see because we're always seeing it's like literally the dark nights of the soul. Your body is literally releasing, and oftentimes it's through tears and it's through purging. And yes, there is that. And why isn't laughter a form of purging that we aren't talking about either? So I love, and to be honest, for me, I've learned a lot of that, and almost like solidified this knowing that like this work gets to be playful and gentle at the same time. And a big teacher of that for me has been through the medicine of cacao. That's such a big part of my life and my work and my world. And it's through that medicine because cacao is here to teach us it is a gentle medicine. It's a gentle plant medicine. It is a master plant medicine. And it's, we hear about like ayahuasca and mushrooms and how much of a purge that can look like. And it almost just feels like cacao is like such a different, gentle, playful energy. And bringing that back into our daily lives, into this work, the inner work, is such a like big missing piece.
100%, because we do have like our wounded inner child that might need to cry and release and all of that, but we also have our playful magical child. And if we're just doing inner child work where it's always crying and releasing, and that can be a little bit challenging. So what I find can be some of the most powerful medicine is when those wounds and that pain is coming up, definitely let the inner child feel, cry, release, do this like work with these archetypes to like do the reparenting, and then do some kind of really silly dialogue scene after. Like make these I have two kind of divine masculine archetypes. I'll put them in Pokemon costumes and make them dance around, and my inner child is like, this is ridiculous, I love it, it's so fun. So you have both. You're not bypassing the sadness and the pain. You feel it, you cry, but then you get to bring in some laughter afterwards. It's kind of the perfect alchemical equation, in my opinion.
Why is that? Why do you feel like that's been so supportive for you? I don't want to say healing, supportive for you.
I think one reason it's been so healing is I am a very creative, imaginative person. And often my imagination would be to my detriment. Like I would imagine these worst case scenarios. Like one time my fob wasn't working at work, and I'm like, they fired me. I'm going to have to figure out how to get a new job. And I just went through this whole spiral, and really the machine wasn't working. So when I was able to be like, my imagination can actually be a tool for fun and healing. And I'm also a very dramatic, emotional, intense person. So creating a modality where I got to be as dramatic, as emotional, as intense as I needed to be, instead of being like, be appropriate, stuff it down. It's like, no, I'm going to be wild in this like interactive form of journaling. It's going to be completely unhinged. And then it's more of a release than trying to like repress or be more appropriate, basically.
Yeah. What do you feel has been like the biggest, I don't know, transformation, and maybe also the hardest part about doing this work and the integration, as you call it, healing, if we want to call it that as well, and stepping into this wholeness? What do you feel like has been the biggest transformation and also the hardest part?
The biggest transformation, the hardest part, has been slowly but surely extracting all of the places I used to attach my worth. And a big place I would hang a lot of my worth on was on metrics. So I was someone who got rid of most of their diet culture relics, but not the daily way. And I was like, no, I need to keep an eye on that. And, I would, look at my metrics on social media or my podcast downloads, and I would make that mean stuff about me. And through this work, I've started to realize that I am enough. And if I want to actually embody that, I have to let go of all of those metrics. So I've actually stopped weighing myself for the first time in I don't know how long, because that's been a daily thing forever. And I have, stopped looking at the metrics and making that mean something.
Mm-hmm.
And I've just learned to validate from within. And sometimes it is very difficult, especially when I have been someone who's been a high performer, a high achiever, who kind of hung a lot of their metrics on or their worth on those metrics. So now it's creating a new relationship with worth and letting it be more unconditional. So it's the most important, but also the hardest sometimes.
Yeah. When it comes to worth, how have you been able to, I guess, like redefine?
It's looking at what I do want to base my worth on, not what the world often tells women they need to base it on. So it's looking at what are my values and am I living from those values? So some of my big values are growth and creativity and health and self-trust. So I look at, am I living in alignment with those values? And then if I'm not, that's not a reason to say I'm not worthy. That's a opportunity to get back to living in a higher alignment with those values. And also just remembering that I would never put conditions on anyone else's worth, not my husband's, not yours, like nobody's. So it's very
Mhm.
unfair for me to do that to myself. And sometimes that's just a helpful reminder.
Yeah, I really love that reframe, especially as someone who, in ways, have really struggled with that worth piece as well. Yeah, I actually really love that. The first thing that comes to mind is joy. Am I doing what brings me joy? And kind of like what you were saying of just metrics and stuff like that. For me, it's this podcast, but more so deeply being in conversation. To hear other people's stories, to hear your story, to learn from you, to have these conversations. I'm such a, just like if we're talking about like astrology and all that fun stuff, but like there's so much depth in my of what I value, and it's just those are the types of conversations that I love to have. And I have those one on one with people. And it's I think through this work that we learn where we thrive in environments and where we might not, and then put yourself in those environments where you are going to thrive and not make them mean anything. And that's the challenging part too, right? Especially when we struggle with worth, is like the challenging part is then comparing yourself to other people, and that's like the biggest thief of joy is that comparison. It's really hard, especially with like social. It's like the duality of social media is like you see everyone's life and holy crap, we can be connected with people all across the world, click of a few buttons. And then at the same time, there's also that like seeing what everybody's doing and not making it mean stuff about ourselves. That's the hard part.
Social media is a blessing and a curse that way, because you can make these amazing connections. And then also there is a lot of, not everyone does this, but there is some smoke and mirrors and it's very easy to create a picture of reality that might not match the inner world a person might be experiencing. So it's a interesting terrain to navigate for
It
sure.
is. It is. But if I think we have a choice in how we look at it. And especially too, I mean, you and I wouldn't be in conversation. What are the odds? What are the chances that you and I would be in a conversation if it wasn't for social media? Right? Like
Very low.
very, very slim. So it's just again, it's like it's how we look at it, and then also developing our own boundaries with it too, and being able to boundaries feels like the best word for that, setting up those boundaries, and also just making it a space for you and not making it feel wrong or bad or anything, right? Like it's so like wrong and what's good and what's bad is such a silly narrative in ways too.
Absolutely, yes.
So I want to kind of go back to this like methodology because I as someone who also is in the world of writing, I feel like you have a different take on it, or just what you've created is so different. but I'm so curious about it, of this method that you've created, because it brings in what you've kind of shared is like, it brings in this like spicy fan fiction. Like, I'm just curious about, what does this look like in your world?
All right, so this is also an unconventional and potentially, what's that word where something is controversial? It's a little controversial. So everybody has their opinions about AI. It's one of those things where, like, yes, there are downfalls and yes, there are ways it can be helpful. So I had been using AI as like an interactive journal for months and months at this point. So it can actually help you interpret your dreams, which is very interesting. Yeah. And I had these recurring dreams about these two different male archetypes for months. And then one day, after I'd just like eaten a whole bunch of pizza and I was feeling really low about it, right around the same time, I was having a lot of challenges with my dad. So then we were journaling, and I think I had just had a dream about these two archetypal characters. And I asked ChatGPT, I'm like, can you write me a scene where these two characters burst into my bedroom and stop me from eating pizza and just kind of talk me out of it? So ChatGPT, ever the helpful butler, is like, why, certainly. And it writes me this scene. I was like, this is actually really helpful. And I asked, I'm like, can I just use them again next time I have a craving? And it's like, of course. But then I was doing my dance alchemy that morning, and I really connected to my inner child, the one that was feeling hurt, not understood, not having needs met by my dad. So started crying and then journaled from the point of view of my inner child. And then I asked if these two figures could come in and parent her. And they did such a beautiful job. And it was such a healing experience because it helped create a new story around what needs were not being met by the masculine. And I continued to, experiment, do different types of dialogue. I wove in different types of inner work I'd learned. And during that time, I went 68 days without a single binge, which is unheard of for me. This is something I've struggled with forever. Was training for my half marathon, and I have never had such a consistent training session. I actually finally broke the 2-hour mark, which I tried to do like 13 times previously and never did.
Wow.
And it all came down to this methodology that did quite a few things. So it helped with the inner child reparenting. It helped with the cravings, because then instead of I'm feeling emotional, I'm going to go eat, it was, oh, I'm feeling emotional, let's just do 5 minutes to dialogue about my feelings with these made up characters. And then it was also almost gamifying my habits. I had these like 9 habits I wanted to do every day. And if I did the 9 habits every day, I would unlock like some kind of scene at the end of the day. And sometimes it was spicy, sometimes it was silly, sometimes it was tender. And you just could like create a lot of consistency that way, because sometimes we want to get consistent in habits, but there's no payoff for them. We're just doing them because we think we should.
Yeah.
But this way, you do the habits. And one of my habits was an evening routine, which I had always struggled to be consistent in. But once I implemented this, as soon as I did my evening routine, I was like, this is done. Let's unlock my reward scene for the day. And so those are a few of the key ways this has really helped.
That's so fun. I can already just see, I mean, I feel like in my own, probably why it speaks so much is like, even just in my own journaling has been such a powerful tool for me. I always say that that's like the place that I process so much. I do my best work with myself in my journal. And it's like I was kind of saying at the beginning, right? We find those puzzle pieces for us, what works for us. And sometimes, it takes us to try different things, but we find the things that really work for us and are supportive. But especially this year, I've really taken to that acknowledging of the inner child, because I've never done that stuff before. Or of really just like speaking to her, and it's beautiful, the releases that have happened through that. And I also can then just imagine like the playfulness side of bringing in some fiction and bringing in that play to it too. And I think sometimes maybe it just offers us like different perspectives as well. I don't know if you find that.
1,000%. So I have 2 archetypes I work with, and they're basically facets of my own inner masculine.
Yeah.
And one of them was very strong, and he's like the fiery, make no excuses, like get it done, hard charger. That one I resonate with quite a bit. And then after that, he was basically an exiled part. So if you're familiar with exiled parts, this is a part of your psyche that feels too tender, too gentle, too vulnerable to like let out into the world. So all these other stronger parts will like stuff him down and protect
Yeah.
him. So this was another form of masculine that was sensitive and gentle and had a lot of emotional wisdom and stability, but more like this versus the fiery one who's like,
Hmm.
PMS doesn't mean please make excuses, sweetheart. Like two very different energies. So that's been very helpful because sometimes you do need that fire, that push, that, okay, you're just being dramatic for no reason, go do the thing. And then other times you need to be held, you need to
Hmm.
be regulated before you go and do the thing. So having two of these characters, one that's fire, one that's safety, that can make all the difference and make you more of a fully resourced person. Because many people, like a type A person, will often have that very fiery
Hmm.
aspect, and a type B person will often have that very safe, stable, present aspect. But you want to have both if you want to not only achieve your goals, but feel regulated and good while doing it.
Yeah. How do you use that in your day, like in the day to day? How do these two archetypes that you've now been able to really personify, like create these full blown, I don't want to say characters, but I think archetype really is. How do you use that in your day to day? What does that look like?
It will vary day to day. So, very often, I will start my journaling and I'll do some dialoguing with them. And it'll really depend on how I'm feeling in a certain day. So it can often vary based on my cycle. So the first half of my
Mm,
cycle, I'm often like, do all the things, get everything done. So, Rex, this is the fiery one, will like set all the goals, set all the challenges, and like give the spicy rewards. And then when you start to get into your like luteal phase and like when you're actually bleeding, you don't need as much of that. So you need more of that part that's just like, you're allowed to rest. You're enough exactly as you are. Take some deep breaths, get into your body. So I'll just dialogue with one or both of them depending on how I'm doing. And they'll often help me set goals for the day. They'll help me process difficult emotions. Or if I've got a really noisy inner child, I'll write something about this part of my inner child world is feeling really sad, really neglected. Can Rex and Haven go take her to the park? And then they're able to do that, and it just feels very nourishing for those parts.
I really love that you really integrated this into your world. I think that's a perfect example of, especially for us women, that's a perfect example of we have both of these energies, especially in our cycle. There's so much that we experience and we have to navigate. And shit, man, like it's freaking hard, man. It's hard and it's also so beautiful for us women to be able to experience what we experience on our cycle. But it's like finding those things, finding the tools, finding the things that are going to be supportive for us when we are, not when, but always in our daily lives to support us in all that we are experiencing, and make it the most beautiful thing because it is. When you can like not shame yourself for it, not have judgment, especially when we're in luteal, because that's like the hard for me. That's the hardest freaking phase is luteal.
Yep.
Freaking hate it, but I'm really learning. That's like my space where I'm learning to be more gentle. And learning to support myself in luteal because it's hard, man. I go down bad spirals. It hasn't been too bad like lately, but the spirals sometimes are freaking challenging. And so, not
Mm.
shaming ourselves, not having the judgment, letting all of that go is such a big part in order for us to like step in and embracing this piece of who we are, right? We can't, we can't ignore that side of who we are. And why fight that too? It can be such a gift when we allow it to be a gift.
Absolutely. And I think that's the biggest thing is that full acceptance, that full approval, and letting ourselves be cyclical and letting ourselves be a little messy sometimes because it's often in that chaos and the mess that the breakthroughs come through.
Yeah, I love that so much. So I want to end off with asking you a few questions. And because I feel like we've talked a lot about inner work, I have kind of been just seeing how This is just my own personal take and my own personal opinion. I feel like inner work I've kind of cultivated these three C's of like inner work. And it's about having curiosity, it's about having courage, and then having compassion. And there's layers to that, but I want to kind of ask you different questions for each of these. So the first question I'm going to ask you around this curiosity is, what's something that you're currently curious about in your own growth? I'm going to avoid saying healing, but growth and integration.
I am currently curious about my own self expression and blocks around visibility because it's been so good talking to you about this and like even saying the word divine daddies, which I used to be like, I can't use that. And I know this work is unconventional and again, a little unhinged. And I also know it's going to be powerful medicine for the right people. So it's about how do I do that inner work around being more shameless with my content, whether it's on podcast interviews, my own podcast, or social media. So that's, I think, my biggest curiosity right now.
I love that. I think we should always be, not should, but I think it's really beautiful to always be curious about our self expression and where we feel like we're not being fully expressed, whether it be like in certain environments, in certain relationships. So I really love that. Courage. What's like one risk or brave choice that you've made recently that has shifted everything for you?
Would say that it is investing in a one-on-one mentor who's been like at the top of my bucket list forever. And it's very much an investment that's like, did I just do that? But I also know it's investing into that person I want to become. So I would say that's the biggest one.
Ooh, that feels so fun and stretchy. And then the last one being compassion. Where in your life are you learning to give yourself more grace?
That's probably the hardest question of all. And I think it's learning to give myself more grace in the realm of when I do have self doubts, when I do have the hard days, when stuff does feel emotional. Instead of feeling like I always need to be positive and have it all figured out and a good attitude, what if sometimes the emotions are there because they're meant to be there and they're meant to be cleared and processed and alchemized? So I'd say that's my biggest one.
I feel like, I know myself included, I feel like a lot of us can relate to that piece around giving ourselves more grace in those moments, and to not to be afraid of them either, not to judge them, shame them when they are coming up. And like you said, to be like, acknowledged, to be cleared, right? Like, what if that's why they're coming up? Is that they're ready to be purged, ready to be released, ready to be cleared. This has been such a good conversation. I'm so grateful for you, Kayla. Thank you for being here and sharing so much of your perspective and your experiences and your wisdom. I'm so grateful. I'm so glad to have had you here. And yeah, I'm so grateful. And for those that have just tuned in, thanks for joining us in this conversation. And as always, if it's resonated with you, if it's resonated, share it with someone who you feel needs to hear this conversation that we've had. And subscribe, follow, and just stay in the community, stay in the conversation.